The conscious brain is a broom closet in the mansion of the brain with very little access to what's going on. There may be free will, but it's going to be a small player if it's there. Every drive wants to philosophize in its spirit. Exactly. Okay, so let's unpack that. If you understand that aim constrains entropy, then you get some sense almost immediately why people cling so desperately to their frameworks. This doesn't answer the free will question, though. I thought we could walk through perception because it doesn't work the way people think it does. When it comes to this question of truth, there is no singular truth because you've got a completely different set of experiences that have wired your brain, my brain, everyone's brain. We're all going to perceive different things and seek different things from the world. You said something else too that I don't think I've thought about exactly before. Hello, everybody. I had the opportunity to speak to David Eagleman today. David is an adjunct professor of psychiatry at Stanford University. He doesn't run a lab there anymore because he runs two companies, Neosensory and Brain Check. David recently did a course for Peterson Academy called Brain Plasticity, and in the largest sense, that's what we talked about today. Plasticity, to some degree, is an archaic term and based on an archaic metaphor, but it's been well adopted, thoroughly adopted in the neuroscience literature, and it means something like adaptive flexibility. And human beings are unique in their degree of adaptive flexibility. Now, the advantage to that is that we can change our environment and we can change our perceptions and we can adapt each generation to a radically new environment. And the price we pay for that is an intensely long period of socialization. And so we talked about brain architecture, we talked about brain chemistry, we talked about the role of aim and intent, the role that aim and intent plays in determining perception, which is a very interesting philosophical issue because what would you say the Enlightenment view of the world, the empiricist view, was that we create our structures of reality by aggregating something like objective data. But the science of perception casts a dim light on that presumption because we prioritize our perceptions and we do that using our aim. And so we don't have perceptions that are devoid of value. And so we talked about that a lot as well. And so if you're interested in a walk through brain science from the structural perspective, the philosophical perspective, the neurochemical perspective, to some degree, if you're interested in perception and emotion and motivation and drive and the competition of personalities and motivational states in the psyche, then this is the podcast for you. So you just recorded a course for Peterson Academy. I did. Yep. It's on brain plasticity, which is really my favorite topic. It's about how brains absorb the world around them and adapt to them. And the interesting part about this is that we are the only species that is as plastic as we are. So you see a zebra get born and in 45 minutes it's running around, or a dolphin is swimming after a few minutes of being born. But if you see a Homo sapien get born, they're not doing it as quickly. And the reason is Mother Nature essentially came up with a different trick with us, where she drops us into the world half-baked and we absorb the world around us, our language, our culture, we take everything that's happened before us and we springboard off the top of that. And this is the reason why Homo sapiens has taken over the planet and been so successful, because we, unlike a horse that's essentially living the same life that horses have for generations, we are living different lives every time. So that's what brain plasticity is about. And I actually don't use the word plasticity as much anymore because that was a term originally coined by William James because he was impressed by plastic manufacture. You could mold something into shape and it would hold that shape. And he said, that's kind of what brains do. You learn the name of your fourth grade teacher and that gets written down and retained. So he called that plasticity. What we're looking at is a system of such complexity. We've got 86 billion neurons. We've got 200 trillion synaptic connections, and every moment of your life, this forest of neurons is reconfiguring and changing. And so I tend to call this live wiring instead of plasticity, only because I think the days of being impressed by plastic manufacturing are past us now. What we're looking at is a system that, every second of your life from cradle to grave is reconfiguring to represent the world around you and all of your experiences and all of your memories. Let's talk about perception. I was reading, The Secret Incognito, The Secret Lives of the Brain, and you spend a fair bit of time in that book talking about perception. And so I thought we could walk through perception because it doesn't work the way people think it does. And the fact that it doesn't work the way people think it does has, I think, profound philosophical implications. So I want to walk through some ideas that I've been developing with you and see what you think about them. So one of the things you pointed out, for example, in the book was that if you get people to look at a painting, which you might think of as a process akin to what a camera does when it takes a photograph, but you ask them different questions about the people in the photograph. So if I remember correctly, the example you used was a picture of a family in a domestic scene in a house. And you could ask them, people who are watching, who are looking at the painting, what those people were doing just before the painting image was fabricated. Or you could ask them how wealthy they are, or you could ask them how old they are. And while you're doing that, you can track the movements of the viewer's eyes. And what you see is that the pattern of visual movement, so of eye movement, is similar across people depending on the question that's asked, but different in consequence of the question. So for example, if you ask people how rich the people in the photograph are, they'll look at the clothing and the material objects in the painting. And if you ask them how old they are, they'll gaze at their faces. And a painting when you're looking at a painting, it isn't necessarily that big an object, but there's still pinpoint perceptions that have a pattern and the pattern reveals the relationship between the goal of the perception and the perception. Have I got that right? That's exactly right. And so the key is if you ask these people if they did anything different while answering the question, they won't have any idea. But their eyes are like on a covert operation doing the thing. So as you know, of course, eyes jump around about 3 times a second. Those are called saccades. And then in between, there's little microsaccades. But the point is we're not aware of that at all. So when your brain is going out to seek the answer to a question, it's running its mission and it's looking at all the points and pieces that it needs to gather the information. But we consciously are totally unaware of that. And this, of course, is representative of most of perception. We don't know how we're gathering the data, but this is what we do. In fact, so what my book Incognito is about, of course, was that almost everything in the brain is happening unconsciously. You just don't have any access to it and really no awareness or acquaintance with it either. And this is just a good example of that. You used a couple of words that were interesting in that description. You talked about you said something approximating being on a mission to answer a question, and then you talked about data. And so I want to take those two things apart. So one of the sub-elements of the word question is quest. And a quest is a journey, and a journey is a mission. Now, there's a big difference between being on a mission and gathering data. Now, like the empirical view of the world, I think we'll stick with the empiricists particularly. The empiricists believe that we gathered data about the world and that we could do that in an objective manner and that we built the world out of that data gathering process. But that's not the same. It's really seriously not the same as answering a question or being on a quest, taking a journey or being on a mission, because a mission is goal directed. And I've been trying to work out a paradox in recent years that emerges because of the difference in those two viewpoints. Data, and you use both those metaphors in your analysis of the eye movement patterns, the data implies something directly. That's value free. But mission implies value, right? It's definitely a mission. So in this case, you're asking a question about the painting and the subject is trying to answer that. But this is true for all of us in all cases. Let's imagine you're on a hike with friends here in Phoenix and you guys are walking along and one of your friends is a mycologist, so he notices the mushrooms that you don't notice. And your other friend is a climatologist, and so he's noticing the tree line and where things have changed. And you got a friend who's a podiatrist and she's noticing the angle of your feet and so on. The point is that all the data is hitting all of your eyes, but you guys are seeing different things. You're having different experiences of the world predicated on what questions you're asking. And that, of course, is predicated on, who you are, all of your experiences, and what is relevant to you, and all your various aims. Yeah, well, so this is the reason I focused in on the philosophical implications of this is because the empiricists, the philosophical implication of the idea of data as reality is that reality itself is value-free and value is added to the data. But mission is a whole different way of conceptualizing things, because if the basis of data is perception and perception is mission-driven, then insofar as perception is reality, reality is not value-free. And that's at the level of perception, right? So this is why the difference is so crucial, because the empirical presumption is the data is there, you add value to it. It's like, no, the value is built into the perception, right? And there's no place in the perception where the value isn't built in. You talked about those so when your eyes move, how many different levels of saccades are there? There's the big ones about 3 times a second, and then there's the microsaccades, which are always moving. That's for a slightly different reason, right? But then you can also move your eyes voluntarily. So there's lots of patterns of there are smooth pursuit eye movements when you're following something, right? Yeah, exactly, right? And then the fact that I can do this and then I can do this, sure. And then also one of the things that's interesting about, you could say, the perception of perception is that we're very much inclined to watch other people's eyes. Generally, when we're conversing with people, when we're interacting with them, we see their eyes and we can see their face, although somewhat less their whole head, but at least their face, which is an emotional display system around the eyes. And the reason that we want to watch someone's eyes is because we can see what they're looking at. And the reason we want to do that is because we can infer their mission, right? We can infer their motivations, which is crucially important. Well, if you're in a defensive situation or a sexual situation or, well, any situation for that matter. And so by watching someone's eyes, you can infer their mission. But one of the corollaries of all of that on the philosophical side is that this is such a bizarre thing to understand, is that our aim structure are perceptions, right? So I've been separating that, and I want you to tell me what you think about this. So I came up with a hypothesis when I was writing my last book, which is that a story is a description. You could say a story is a description of the value hierarchy that structures perception. That's actually what a story is. And so part of the reason that we're so interested in stories is because, as you pointed out, when you look at the world, there's many, many ways you could look at any scene, an infinite number of ways, in fact. So you have to navigate your way through every glance, and the structure of navigation you use determines the purpose of the perception. But it's also a strategy. And so if I know your story and I can see that you're successful, then I can adopt your mode of perception, right? It's not your mode of adding value to the world. It's way more fundamental than that. Yeah, tell me what you mean by adding value to the world. Well, you could think of the world as a place of dead facts, that they're all equally perceivable. It's like, well, no, because perception is value-based. Because we've always thought, in some ways, folk psychology is perception first, right? And then it's motivation or emotion after that, let's say, and then it's cognition. And sort of in a linear chain, and that turns out to be like, it's staggering. It's not just wrong. The power of your brain, rewiring, decision-making, and reality shaping. Ladies and gentlemen, today I want to talk about something truly extraordinary, the incredible power of your brain. Your brain is not just a storage unit for memories or a processor for thoughts. It is a living, adaptable, and constantly evolving organ that holds the key to your future. 1, your brain rewires itself, neuroplasticity at work. Every time you think, learn, or experience something new, your brain changes. This phenomenon, called neuroplasticity, is the reason why you are never stuck. You are not your past mistakes. You are not your failures. Your brain can reshape itself, creating new neural pathways, breaking old patterns, and forming better habits. Think about it. If you consistently tell yourself, I'm not good enough, your brain strengthens that belief. But if you start saying, I am improving every day, your brain rewires in that direction. The more you repeat a thought or action, the stronger the neural connections become. So the question is, what are you training your brain to believe? 2, the science of decision making. You are in control. Every decision you make is a result of complex interactions between different parts of your brain. The logical prefrontal cortex helps you think critically, while the emotional amygdala reacts based on past experiences and fears. Most people let fear make their decisions. They let past failures dictate their future choices. But here's the truth. Your brain can learn to choose differently. By practicing mindfulness and conscious thinking, you can train your brain to make stronger, bolder decisions, ones that align with your goals, not your fears. The next time you face a tough choice, ask yourself, am I making this decision out of fear or out of faith in my potential? 3, your brain shapes your reality. Your thoughts become your world. Your perception of reality is created inside your mind. What you focus on grows. If you always look for problems, your brain will find them. If you choose to see opportunities, they will appear. Successful people aren't just lucky. They train their brains to recognize opportunities where others see obstacles. They program their minds for resilience, for perseverance, for success, and so can you. Final thoughts. Rewire, decide, transform. Change your thoughts, and you will change your brain. Make conscious decisions and you will shape your future. Train your mind to see possibilities and you will create a new reality. Your brain is your most powerful tool. It is never too late to rewire it for success. The only question is, what kind of reality do you want to create? Now go out there and start shaping the life you deserve.